continue. Welcome everyone, and thank you for attending our third online educational seminar event. I intend on producing a webinar containing up-to-date information every 3 months. Today, I'm very excited to be able to make available to you a very informative presentation workshop titled The New Retirementality, presented by Alex Sui from Invesco. This is a slight departure from previous webinars in that the focus is on retirement and lifestyle planning as opposed to investment planning and updates. This pandemic has had a tremendous impact on each of our lives. I firmly believe just as COVID-19 began, it will end, likely with a vaccine. We are at the intersection now of maximum new cases and an increasing number of vaccines being issued. This time reminds me of when I ran the 400 meters in track and field in my youth. It was a long sprint, and inevitably after 300 meters, you would hit a wall and have to mentally and physically fight to complete the last 100 meters of the race. Well, all of us are now at the 300 meter mark in this pandemic, and we have to work very hard to get ourselves to the end in a safe, positive, and healthy way. We can do it. We can utilize the same attributes that we have demonstrated as successful investors. That is, in order for us to achieve an above average rate of return, we are patient, we're persistent, we have faith in the future, and we have a long-term view. Many of you have asked how we are making out in the pandemic. Well, we've never had so much alcohol in the office. Unfortunately, the wrong kind. Amanda and I are continuing to focus on providing a high level of personal and professional financial planning service in our ever-changing world, while maintaining our long-term view and ensuring we maintain a safe environment for our clients and staff. If you have any questions during the presentation, please hit the question mark icon in the box at the top right-hand corner of your screen and type your question. We will attempt to answer your questions at the end of Alex's talk based on time allowed. And now I'd like to introduce our guest speaker and presenter today. Alex Sui is Vice President and Senior Consultant at Invesco and is presenting a workshop entitled The New Retirementality. This workshop is based on a book written by Mitch Anthony. Invesco and its predecessor Trimark have been on my recommendation list since 1983. I have great respect for Alex and his organization. Good afternoon, Alex. How are you?
I am doing very well, Gary. How are you?
Very good.
Awesome. Well, thank you to you and Amanda for allowing me to come and speak with your clients today. And I want to thank all of you for taking the time out of your busy day to allow us to speak. If you're not familiar with Invesco, as Gary mentioned, we are one of the largest asset management firms anywhere in the world, managing roughly $1.5 trillion around the globe for individual investors, pension plans, large institutions. But more importantly, we look to partner with elite financial advisory teams to help them, and more so help their clients get more out of life. And we deliver that by doing and finding research-based strategies like the one we're going to present to really help you and get thinking about what retirement is. So I promise you today will not be an exhaustive, extensive insight into tax and retirement policies, more so thinking about how you're going to fill your buckets of time and how you're going to ensure that you are comfortable and satisfied with the retirement that you're having. So with that, Gary, I'm going to ask you, would you mind putting up the slides for me, please?
There you are.
All right, excellent. Well, thank you. And I want to introduce everybody to the new retirementality. And we entitled this Exit or Just Changing Lanes. And we think there's been a dramatic shift over the last 30 and 40 years in terms of the perception of what retirement looks like. And more so, people are encouraged and wanting to be active through retirement. So what are we going to be talking about today? Really, there's three core questions that we're trying to get at. First, we need to understand what retirement. So how did we get to where we were today, or where we are today? Secondly, this insight and this thought process around the new retirement mentality. And then lastly, and where we're going to spend the majority of our time, is really around the three critical questions. So let's get into it. What does retirement? Now, if we were doing this as a live session where we'd be sitting around at charcoal, and hopefully in a year's time we'll be able to do that again, I'd ask the broad audience a simple question. If I said the statement traditional retirement, what would that mean to you? And in times past, that would think about traditional retirement being sitting back and relaxing, you know, spending time with family, increasing golf, right? All these things that we think of as leisure activities. Well, one of the most prevailing, enduring legacies of what retire meant was the idea of the golden watch, right? You typically work at an establishment or a company for 25, 35 years. And as the time came to the end, your boss would present you this lovely golden watch. You'd have a big party, you'd go home, and you'd sit back and sail off into the sunset. Well, that's not really what we're experiencing today. And in fact, I don't think the golden watch is all that great of a retirement gift. What are you supposed to go home and just sit and watch the minutes, hours, and seconds go by? If you have anybody in your life that you care about or are thinking about a retirement gift, I think a far more appropriate gift would be looking at a compass. And I think the metaphorical meaning behind that and looking at retirement not as an end date or as a stopwatch, but really thinking of it as a new adventure. So where did this concept of retirement come from? And I really have to take you back to the late 1800s. Now, for those of you who are students of history, you would probably know who this is. If you're not familiar, I will tell you it is not Wilford Brimley, the former pitchman for Quaker Oats in the late 80s and 90s. This is actually Otto von Bismarck, the Chancellor of the German Empire, and he is credited as being the godfather of the modern pension system. And it actually came about in a fairly unique way. During von Bismarck's reign over Germany and that transition from Prussia, he really wanted to get aging German bureaucrats out of government. And what he thought was to institute a pension would force new blood into his ranks and folks that were favorable to him. On the wise and sage advice of his advisors, they told him, well, you can't just do this for government employees. You really need to do that for everyone. And that was really when the first state social safety net was implemented. And really, it wasn't until 1910 where it began to expand as common policy throughout the rest of Europe. And in fact, it was implemented in Canada in 1927 and followed by the US in 1935 as part of FDR's New Deal. So let's uncover exactly what was going on. Now, if we think back to when, well, at the time was provincial legislation, now known as the Canada Pension Plan in 1927, the thinking behind the program was really that the average retirement age was going to be 70 years. But if you looked at the lifespan of the average Canadian, it was 63 years. So you had a retirement of -7 years. That was a fairly good policy for the government, and the thinking was if you did actually make it to age 70, much of the physical labor that was required of day-to-day work was not able to be done, and that the state should take care of you. Let's fast forward to 2020, and what we find is the average retirement age continues to be roughly 65, but the average lifespan today is 81 years, meaning that you are expected on average to have about a 16-year retirement. Well, if we think of that, and this is why there has been an explosion over the last 3 decades of government programs such as RSPs, TFSAs, and an explosion of wealth advice because the government can no longer fund exclusively for 16 years at your expected income level. So let's move forward into this new retirement mentality. And if we think back to the previous example, whether it was age 65 or age 70, it began looking like that was the end. That was the finish line for you, right? Based on life expectancy, based on how the perception of retirement was. You retired, you enjoyed your final few years, and then off you went. Well, today, retirees, and in particular baby boomers, think of it in vastly different terms. That the word retirement is now a transition into a new stage of life. And it really requires us a different level of thinking, but also comes with some complexities that we might not have thought about in the past. So now where we're going to spend the majority of our time is on this idea of the 3 critical questions. One of the challenges I think all of us understand when it comes to retirement, and I even think of my wife and I, is we really have differing ideas of what the retirement should look like. And also there's some road signs and posts that add confusion and complexity to that process. When we think about initiatives that we want to do and money dates, the stories and articles that we read in the Globe or the Financial Times or on BNN really make this entire concept of retirement very confusing. So what our goal is going to be over the next 25 to 30 minutes is to take all of these road signs, these distractions around retirement, to organize them into 3 core buckets that is going to help you shape and understand what retirement is going to be like for you. So here are the 3 critical questions that we're going to help you answer. First and foremost, what is it going to look like? Secondly, when is it going to happen? And finally, how am I going to get there? So let's spend some time on understanding what is it going to look like. When it comes to understanding what retirement looks like, what we identified through our research was that there was 3 critical questions that retirees needed to answer. They needed to understand what is going to be my location, what is going to be my vocation, and lastly, what will I do for my vacation? So let's take a deeper look and understand the definitions behind all 3. So when we think of location, a position or site occupied, where am I going to spend the majority of my time? When it comes to vocation, it's an undertaking for which one is especially suited, and I want you to pay special attention to one's purpose, because there's often confusion in saying, well, vocation is simply your job, and that's not necessarily the case. And then lastly is vacation, an extended period of leisure and recreation, the act of vacating. How do we begin to relax, and what does that look like? So, for those of you at home, well, all of you are at home, but for those of you who have either an electronic version of the materials or have the physical version, what I'd like you to have available is what we have here are various flashcards. And what you'll see, whether you pull it up on your computer or you have them available in front of you, is that there is a set of cards, and each set is color-coded and labeled. And the 3 labels, all of them, will match exactly what we just discussed: location, vocation, and vacation. And the exercise to begin shaping what retirement looks like to us is to organize what is important. Now, again,